Hey folks, Granison Shines here, and I am with Frank Shines, and during this video I'm going to give Frank Shines an opportunity to tell you who he is, what he's about, and how he came up with the notion to develop the book Left In But Left Out. So Frank, fire away.
Okay, well great. First of all, let's give credit where credit is due.
Absolutely.
My co-author, Granison Shines, has been instrumental in a lot of research, the editing, the conversations, the collaboration, and particularly the input on the leadership trap chapter of the book, which I think all of you will find fascinating. Let in but left out, right? Why do we have labeled it let in but left out? What is this book about? This is the manuscript. As you can see the title, Leadership, Faith, and Knowledge in the Age of AI, Coronavirus, and Fake News. So I grew up in Oakland, California. Granison knows this very well. My mother was a single parent. My father, unfortunately at that time, the way the laws worked in California, primarily the mother would receive custody following a divorce. And so that's what happened. So at age 2.5, 3 years old, my older sister Trudy and I, we went to live with my mother, and pretty much lived with my mother until I was about 13 years old. And that's when, because of some very unfortunate events around child abuse and sexual abuse in the family, my father was able to regain custody of us. And that's when my life turned around. But prior to that, grew up in Oakland, California. At the time, that city had the highest crime rate in the nation. We talk about Ferguson, we talk about Compton and some of those areas in Chicago. Well, that was the current day Chicago, Compton, Ferguson, if you will. So grew up there with ultimately three total sisters. So I was the only young man in the family, and so I felt I had to defend my sisters, and so got involved in a lot of fights. Was recruited to go into gangs. The weekend that I was supposed to make a decision about what gang I was to go into is the weekend that incident occurred. And so lucky for me, sometimes in the darkest of times, the greatest opportunities arise, right? So I think that's a good lesson for coronavirus. Maybe some of you are in the midst of a whole new plan for your life based upon having time off to rethink some things and take advantage of this unfortunate COVID crisis that we're going through. Luckily, went to move in with my father. We went to Fremont, California. He was currently working as the chief respiratory therapist there at Washington Hospital in Fremont, California, in the Silicon Valley, Northern California. Then we moved up to Washington State within a few months, and I grew up in Seattle, Washington. I started high school there, and was part of the engineering and science and electronics community. Learned a lot about computers, and was very interested in sports. Played soccer, gymnastics. Ultimately went on to receive a presidential appointment to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, where I continued my gymnastics career and got an opportunity to train and compete with Olympic athletes. Met some amazing people, some of the greatest leaders that anyone could imagine, not just professors, but these are people who fought in World War I, fought in World War II, fought in Vietnam War, the Korean War, right? So not only did they have their masters and PhDs and were great scholars and professors, but they also had lots of hands-on experience, and they relayed that information to me. And so during that time, we learned to jump out of parachute, jump with parachutes. We learned how to do sailplanes, fly a sailplane, fly a T-41, single engine aircraft. And then after graduation, I went to pilot training at what's then Williams Air Force Base, back in your neck of the woods, in the Phoenix area. And because of the downsizing of the military, ultimately, and some problems that I was having with my back, and also humanitarian reassignment because of my mother, I went to Sacramento to work at McClellan Air Force Base as what's known as a management engineer. And a management engineer does a combination of industrial engineering and management consulting for the Department of Defense, and that's when the light bulb came on for me. That's when I knew what I really wanted to do. Despite the fact that I liked being in the plane, in the cockpit, I also was realizing that one, the military was downsizing because
Right.
this was
Yeah.
not long after the fall of the former Soviet Union, and all the bases were closing. I think 2/3 of the military bases that I was at,
Wow.
they're no longer in existence. That was called the peace dividend under President Clinton. It was passed on to President Bush. And so consequently, because of that, I took an early out of the military, of the Air Force, went down to Brazil, spent a year living in Brazil, working for a Brazilian economist and attorney, and a number of his businesses. He spoke 7 languages, so we'd sit around the table, and there would be people from Africa, from Europe, from Asia, right,
Wow.
all speaking, just enjoying all sorts of great music,
That's
you know,
awesome.
Brazilian music, great food, yeah. It was an amazing experience. And while I was down there, that's when everything around the internet was taking off. But I had already gotten exposure to the internet because of some work I'd done prior to pilot training for a few months. And also in the military, we had the internet before it became commercial in the mid-90s, so I got that initial exposure. So consequently, when I saw the internet going commercial, I drew up on that and spent a lot of time in Brazil beginning to write a lot of the ideas that are kind of encapsulated in
Sure.
Let In But Left Out. And the idea around that book is called Beyond Flat Earth Management. What happens when the internet comes along and it changes all the economics around traditional businesses? Much of what we then saw kind of unfold over the course of the next 15 years. Came back to the United States, ultimately went to work with IBM and Ernst & Young doing consulting work all over, from Asia to Berlin, all over Europe, France. Spent a lot of time working in the UK, down in Santiago, Chile, up into Alaska, and pretty much across the Americas on different projects as a consultant with Ernst & Young, and then later as a principal with IBM Consulting Group. Then ultimately came out here to Florida to work with Pilgrim Software, where I got the technology side of things, and have been since focused on information technology, culture change, and how do we help people and organizations improve.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Frank. There you have it, Mr. Frank Shines.
Thank you.
That was good.
Yeah.
I think you need to plug up your computer.